The worst kind of heartbreak isn't when they leave. It's when they make you believe you still have a chance. When they keep looking at you like you're still theirs, saying all the right words just soft enough to make you wait and hope and ache. It's when they let you hold on with both hands, not telling you they've already let go. That's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't just break you. It rewires you. It makes you question your own instincts, your own worth, because you weren't just abandoned. You were led to believe you were safe, right up until the moment you weren't. My name is Olivia. I'm 31 years old, and for the last year, I thought I'd met the love of my life. For now, let's just call him Ryan. I met Ryan at a mutual friend's rooftop birthday party in the city. It was one of those nights where the skyline glowed like a movie set, and everything felt a little warmer than usual. I'd been standing awkwardly near the drinks table, trying to decide between wine and sparkling water, when he appeared beside me and said, "They're both terrible options. Go for the sangria." It was a stupid line, but it made me laugh. And something about the way he looked right at me when he said it, steady, confident, like I was the only person on that rooftop, stuck with me. From there, things moved quickly, but not in the reckless way I'd experienced before. Ryan wasn't a whirlwind, he was a steady hand. The type to text me good morning because he wanted to, not because he was trying to keep me interested. The type to remember how I took my coffee and surprise me with it without saying a word. We built our own little rituals. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and reading the news together in bed. Wednesday nights were midweek resets. We'd cook something new, put on a playlist, and talk about the future like it was inevitable that we'd be in it together. He met my friends, and they adored him. He fit in with my family so well, my mom once joked she'd keep him if I didn't. And I trusted him, really trusted him, in a way that was new for me. No games, no push and pull, just solid. That's why, when the first signs came, I didn't see them as red flags. It started small. One night over dinner, he mentioned he'd been feeling a bit overwhelmed. Work was intense, he said. Life was noisy. He smiled while he said it, reaching for my hand like he was reassuring me, not warning me. "I just think I need a bit of space to clear my head," he added. "Not from us and from everything. You know how much I care about you." And because he said it gently, because he kissed my hand afterwards, because he framed it like self-care, not rejection, I believed him. I told myself space could be good, that sometimes love needed air to breathe, that this was what healthy couples did, supported each other even through confusing chapters. So I agreed. I told him to take all the time he needed, and I did it with a smile, believing, truly believing, it was for our growth. I had no idea that space wasn't a pause in our story. It was the start of a whole new ending. I've been through heartbreak before, the kind that robs you of appetite, makes you doubt your own worth, and turns every day into a waiting game for a text that never comes. The kind where you replay every conversation, searching for the moment things shifted, convinced that if you just said one different word, it would have saved everything. After my last breakup, I promised myself I'd never be that woman again. Never the one begging for attention, never the one holding on while the other person quietly lets go. I swore I would protect my dignity, keep my independence, and never let someone else's affection dictate my sanity. Then Ryan walked in. From the very beginning, he didn't just earn my trust. He made it feel effortless to give. He was consistent in a way I didn't even know I needed. There were no 3-day gaps in communication, no breadcrumb text to keep me hooked, no emotional roller coaster. If he said he'd call, my phone lit up exactly when he promised. If we made plans, he followed through, without a single "sorry, something came up," that left me standing alone somewhere. But it wasn't just that he kept his word. It was how present he was when he was with me. He noticed things no one else ever had. How I always fiddled with my necklace when I was nervous. How I'd instinctively tilt my head toward the sun like a plant whenever we sat outside. He'd tuck my hair behind my ear mid-conversation, not to make a move, but simply to see my face. He didn't hover on the sidelines of my life. He stepped right into it. My friends adored him. My family warmed to him quickly. At Sunday dinners, he'd chat with my dad about football while making sure my mom's wine glass was never empty. When we went to my best friend's art show, he spent the whole evening moving from painting to painting, asking thoughtful questions, actually seeing her work instead of scrolling his phone like most boyfriends do at those things. It wasn't just about now. We had a future threaded into everything we did. Lazy Sunday mornings would drift into conversations about where we might want to live one day, which city would feel most like home, what kind of dog we'd get, which beaches we'd take our kids to. And then, one afternoon, we passed a jewelry store. I paused at the window, and he gently steered me inside. "Just so I know your taste," he said, grinning. I pointed out a ring. Simple, elegant, the kind of piece that would never go out of style. He didn't say much, just nodded and smiled, but I caught the way his eyes flickered like he'd locked that detail away for later. That moment felt like a quiet promise. By the time we hit our 1-year mark, I didn't just feel secure, I felt certain. This wasn't the kind of relationship you question, but then, the week before that conversation, the one that changed everything, I noticed the smallest shift. Nothing huge, just absence in disguise. His texts started coming hours later. If I called, it would ring out, and I'd get a quick, "Sorry, busy day" later on. Plans we'd made for dinner suddenly turned into, "I think I'm going to work late," or "I'm just feeling drained tonight." I'd ask if everything was okay, and he'd smile, that warm, familiar smile that had always made me feel safe, and say, "Yeah, just a lot on my mind. You know how it is." And I told myself I did know. I reminded myself of that vow I made after my last heartbreak, not to cling, not to jump to worst-case scenarios. Healthy couples give each other space. They don't read danger into every dip in energy, so when he took my hands one Friday evening and said, "I think I just need a little space to clear my head," I didn't hear an ending. I heard honesty. I heard love making room to breathe. I told him I understood, that I wanted him to take whatever time he needed, because I believed space was a pause, not a door closing, because I believed in us. And because the man who once memorized my dream ring could never turn that into a goodbye. At least, that's what I thought. The first crack didn't look like a crack at all. It looked like a happy accident. It was a Sunday morning, one of those slow ones where the light is soft and the air feels still. I was lying in bed with coffee, hair a mess, mind somewhere between awake and dreaming, letting my thumb drift through Instagram. You know the kind of scroll I'm talking about. Not looking for anything in particular, just letting the feed fill the silence. Then I saw it. A group photo from a dinner the night before, the kind where everyone's leaning in, cheeks flushed from wine, plates pushed aside to make room for dessert menus. There must have been 12 people crammed around the table, and there, at the far end, was Ryan. Leaning back, laughing, his head tilted slightly towards someone out of frame. That expression, eyes half closed, mouth open mid-laugh, was one I knew well. The one I used to fall asleep next to. I blinked at the screen. I hadn't known he'd be at a dinner that night. Then again, we were in this limbo. He'd called it space. A pause. A way for us to grow individually so we could be better together. I'd agreed because it sounded mature, like something a couple in a self-help book might do. But in my head, space meant quiet nights in, maybe journaling, maybe missing each other, not candlelit dinners surrounded by people I didn't know. I tapped the photo to zoom in. The pixels blurred, but not enough to hide the way his shoulders were angled toward the person next to him. My chest tightened. I sent him a message, trying to keep it casual. Dinner looked nice. Work thing. An hour passed. Then his reply popped up. Yeah, just a team dinner. Nothing special. That should have been the end of it. But I'd been to his team dinners before. They were held in bland chain restaurants, the kind with laminated menus and fluorescent lighting. Not cozy, low-lit places where people linger over tiramisu. Still, I told myself to let it go. I'd promised myself years ago, after my last relationship, that I wouldn't be the jealous, clingy one. I wasn't going to interrogate him over a dinner. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from a friend. Not close enough to know the ins and outs of my life, but close enough to recognize Ryan on sight. No greeting, just a single photo. It was from the same dinner, but this time taken from the other end of the table. And suddenly, Ryan wasn't just part of a group. He was turned toward a woman I didn't recognize. She was leaning into him, her shoulder brushing his. Under the table, half hidden by the shadow of the tablecloth, her hand was resting over his. Fingers curled slightly, not the casual touch of a colleague, but the silent claim of someone who thinks she belongs there. My stomach dropped. When I called him later, I tried to keep my voice even. Who was she? There was the briefest pause, half a second, maybe less, but enough for my skin to prickle. She's just a friend, he said finally, almost bored. You're reading into it. Ryan, I saw her hand on yours. He let out this deep, exaggerated sigh, the kind meant to make you feel like you're the one being unreasonable. It was nothing. You can't even tell what's happening in that photo. This, his voice sharpened, is exactly why I needed space. You twist everything. And just like that, the conversation wasn't about the photo anymore. It was about me, my trust issues, my tendency to overreact. I didn't push further. Not because I believed him. I didn't. But because I could feel that old, familiar weight pressing down on me. The one that tells you arguing will only dig you in deeper. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to picture the life we'd been building, the trips we'd talked about, the ring styles we'd looked at. I told myself space was supposed to feel uncomfortable, that maybe this was part of it. The next morning, the truth gutted me. I was mindlessly tapping through Instagram stories when one stopped me cold. A woman, smiling so wide it looked like her face might crack, holding her left hand up to the camera. On her finger, a diamond ring that caught the light like a flashbulb. The caption read, "Couldn't be happier," but my eyes weren't on the ring. They were on the man standing behind her, Ryan. Same shirt from the dinner, same watch I'd bought him for his birthday. His arm resting on the back of her chair like it belonged there. I stared at it so long, my thumb went numb holding the screen. The timestamp told me everything. She'd posted it hours after he'd told me I was imagining things. My chest didn't explode in anger. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, there was this strange stillness, this hollow calm, because in one swipe, the space he'd asked for became his proposal to someone else. And the hope I'd been holding on to turned instantly into humiliation. The second I saw that story, my first instinct wasn't to think. It was to call. The phone barely rang once before he picked up. "Wow," he said, his voice laced with a kind of amused disbelief. "I was wondering how long it would take you." "Ryan, I just saw a post." "A post," he interrupted, almost laughing. "You're calling me in the middle of the day over a post? It's a photo of you, with a woman wearing an engagement ring." There was a long, deliberate pause. Then he let out a sharp breath through his nose, the kind of half laugh, half sigh that tells you they've already decided you're ridiculous. "Okay, first of all, she's engaged to someone else. That's not my ring. And second, you're seriously making up stories because you can't handle giving me a little space?" I gripped the phone tighter. "I'm not making anything up. You were holding her hand at dinner. And now she's posting photos of you in the background of her engagement announcement?" He chuckled, low and condescending. "Do you hear yourself right now? You sound obsessed. I told you before. You twist things. This is exactly why I asked for some time apart. It was like having a conversation in a hall of mirrors. Every time I tried to point toward something concrete, he'd tilt it just enough that I couldn't tell if I was holding the truth or some warped reflection. By the time we hung up, I wasn't sure what had just happened. He hadn't actually explained anything, but he'd spoken with such certainty, such calm dismissal, that a part of me wondered if maybe I had overreacted. That's how gaslighting works. It's not about convincing you their version is true. It's about making you doubt whether yours ever was. The following week, the ripple effect started. A friend I'd known since university sent me a message. "Hey, just checking in. Ryan said you two are having a rough patch and you've been kind of intense about it." Intense. That word stung. Not because it wasn't true. I was intense, but not without reason. But because I could hear his voice behind it, calm, reasonable Ryan, explaining to people we both knew that I was spiraling, that I couldn't handle the distance we'd agreed on. I heard from another mutual friend at a party. "Ryan says you've been imagining stuff, that you've always had a jealous streak." Always. Like it was a personality flaw I'd been carrying around for years, waiting to implode our relationship. I started to notice the shift in conversations. Friends I'd usually see once a week now took longer to reply to messages. Group chats I was in went quiet when I joined. Some people still talked to me normally, but their eyes would flicker when his name came up, like they weren't sure what they were supposed to believe. It's hard to explain how isolating it is when someone starts quietly rewriting the story of your life. Not in big, dramatic announcements, but in passing comments, in little corrections to the narrative that, over time, settle into people's memories as fact. And here's the cruel part. The more you defend yourself, the more it looks like you have something to defend. One night, a friend I trusted pulled me aside after drinks. Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying, be careful. He's saying you're losing it, and some people believe him. If you push too hard, it's going to look bad. That was the moment I realized I was losing the social ground too. It wasn't just him I had to prove the truth to. It was everyone else. All the people whose opinions would filter back to him. So, I made a decision. I stopped confronting him. Not because I was letting it go, not even close, but because I knew every argument, every emotional reaction was another stone in the wall he was building between me and reality. If he wanted to think I was backing down, fine. If he wanted to believe I was swallowing the lies, perfect. In truth, I was watching. Watching the times he went dark online. Watching who followed him. Watching the little changes in his stories. The blurred edge of a wine glass in the corner. The faint echo of a second voice in the background of a video. He thought he'd bought himself safety with the people around us. What he didn't realize was that all he'd really bought was my silence. And silence can be dangerous when you're using it to load the gun. When you start looking backward with new information, it's like rewatching a movie and suddenly catching all the clues you missed the first time. Except in my case, the clues weren't clever or subtle. They were just things I didn't want to see. I started with the week he first mentioned needing space. I remember thinking it came out of nowhere. One minute we were talking about a summer trip to Portugal. The next he was saying, I just need a little room to breathe. Back then, I took him at his word. Now, I opened my laptop, pulled up the woman's Instagram, and scrolled to that same week. There she was, wine glass in hand, golden hour light spilling over her shoulders, and in the reflection of the restaurant window, a faint, familiar profile I'd seen 1,000 times. The next week, he'd told me he had a late work dinner and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I remembered pacing in my kitchen, heating leftovers, telling myself to give him the benefit of the doubt. But there it was on her page, a photo of a dessert with a sparkler in it, tagged at a place I knew he loved. And in the corner of the table, his watch, the one I gave him for our anniversary, glinting under the candlelight. I started going through our old texts. It was eerie how neatly the gaps lined up. Conversations that had been flowing all day would suddenly die mid-sentence. What time will you be home? No reply until the next morning. Sorry, fell asleep early. But now I knew where those silences lived. They lived in her world, in her laughter across the table, in her hand resting on his arm while mine was holding my phone, waiting for a reply. I thought about all the mornings he'd rushed me out the door after staying at his place. No lingering coffee, no lazy Sunday movies like we used to. I used to think he was just being practical, getting an early start. Now I wondered if he was just clearing the runway before she arrived. And then there were the trips. The client meetings in other cities that he never wanted me to come along for. The weekends he said he'd be visiting his brother, but didn't want to bore me with family errands. I found her posts from those same weekends. Beaches I'd never been invited to, hikes we'd once said we'd do together, dinners at restaurants we'd bookmarked for our anniversary. Every timestamp was another nail in the coffin of the story I'd been telling myself. It wasn't just that he'd moved on. It was that he'd been living a double life so seamlessly that I hadn't even felt the shift. He hadn't needed space to figure out if he loved me. He'd needed space to build a life with someone else and make sure the timelines didn't collide. I went further back. Months before the space talk, I found the subtle starts. The weekend he skipped my friend's engagement party because he was wiped from work. She had posted a photo from a wedding that same weekend. Him in the background, his arm around her waist. The trip I took with my sister in March, when he'd texted every day until the last night when he went silent. That night, her story showed a view from his balcony. The more I connected the dots, the more I realized it wasn't a few weeks of overlap. This had been in motion for months. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't been waiting for him to come back to me. I'd been waiting for him to finish building a life with someone else. I didn't message her right away. For a few days, I just sat with it. The screenshots, the overlap, the ring in that Instagram story. My brain was still trying to convince me there had to be some mistake, some explanation that would make this less humiliating. But the silence was eating me alive. So I typed the message. "Hey, I think we need to talk about Ryan." I half expected her to block me or to send back a wall of insults. Instead, her reply came less than a minute later. "Yeah, let's meet." That was it. No emojis, no defensiveness, just a cold agreement, like she'd been waiting for me. We chose a small cafe 2 suburbs over, neutral ground, somewhere we'd both feel safe but wouldn't run into people we knew. I got there first. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set my cup down because I could hear the spoon rattling against the porcelain. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately, not from the ring photo, but from the way Ryan had described a friend from work once. Long hair, warm smile. She didn't look like the villain in my story. She looked like someone who'd been blindsided too. We sat. The first few minutes were stiff, like we were both trying to figure out who was holding the real knife in this mess. "Did you know about me?" I asked. She shook her head. "He told me you were an ex, that you couldn't let go, that you were stalking his socials." The words stung more than I expected. I'd heard him say similar things about other women before, and I'd believed him. "What about you?" she asked. I shook my head. "I thought you were just a friend from work. He never said your name. I only found out because someone sent me a picture from that dinner last month." We started comparing notes, scrolling through our phones, pulling up messages, photos, posts. It was like watching a split-screen movie where the same character lives 2 lives at once. The weekend he told me he was visiting his brother. He was in her city, taking her to a jazz club. The night he and I had a fight, and he went for a drive to clear his head. He was at her place, cooking dinner. The afternoons I thought he was working late, when he'd send a quick, busy, talk later. She was sending him selfies from her couch, his hoodie draped around her shoulders. Every space day he'd asked for was a date with her. Every moment I thought he was healing our relationship, he was strengthening theirs. I don't know what hurt more, the overlap or how seamless he'd made it all look. And then she said it. "He proposed last week." The words landed heavy, like they'd been dropped into my lap and cracked something open inside me. She must have seen my face drain because she quickly pulled out her phone and turned the screen toward me. There it was, a picture of him, kneeling, holding out a ring, her hand covering her mouth in shock. I stared at the background. A park bench, not just any park bench. The one where 2 summers ago, he and I had sat eating ice cream while he told me, "I can see us here in 10 years watching our kids run around." I don't remember what I said next. I just remember the sound in my ears. That hollow rush, like when you're underwater and someone's shouting, but it's all muffled. She kept talking, explaining that he'd told her the proposal spot was special to him because he'd always imagined starting his forever there. That was when I realized the worst part. He hadn't just stolen my trust. He'd stolen my moments, my memories. The private things we'd shared had just been recycled for someone else. I asked her, "When did you start dating?" She scrolled back through her messages, gave me a date. It was 8 months before the space talk. 8 months before he looked me in the eye and said he was committed to working on us. 8 months of 2 parallel relationships, each of us thinking we were the main character. She told me she'd almost said no to the proposal. Not because she suspected anything, but because she thought it was too soon. "But he convinced me," she said. "He said, when you know, you know." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that was exactly what he'd said to me in our first year, that he'd built his entire script from recycled lines and stolen promises. Instead, I just nodded, because I could see it dawning on her too. The way her mouth tightened, the way her eyes started scanning the table like she was replaying her own memories. By the end of the conversation, there was no animosity between us. Just a shared sense of having been played by the same man in the same way, for the same reasons. We didn't hug when we left. We didn't swap numbers or promise to stay in touch. We just walked in opposite directions, each of us carrying the weight of a story that had been split in two and then stitched back together with lies. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that park bench, about how, in his mind, it must not have belonged to me at all. It was just a stage, one he could reset for the next scene, the next actress, the next audience. And that was when the final piece clicked into place. Ryan hadn't asked for space because he was confused. He hadn't needed time to work out his feelings. He'd needed time to build an engagement and keep me in his life just long enough to make sure his emotional calendar was full until the ring was on her finger. He wasn't splitting his heart between two women. He was filling his own, using both of us to keep it overflowing. I didn't text him. I didn't call. I wanted to look him in the eye when I laid it all out. The proposal photos, the dates, the messages, the truth he'd been shuffling like a deck of cards in his pocket. So I waited until I knew he'd be home. His car was in the driveway, lights on in the kitchen. I walked up the steps, my heart hammering so loud it felt like it was in my throat. He opened the door, surprised but smiling that fake, easy smile I used to find comforting. "Hey," he said, leaning against the frame like I'd just dropped by for a casual chat. I didn't bother with small talk. I held up my phone, screen glowing with the photo, him on one knee, her hands covering her mouth, that park bench in the background. For a second, the smile froze. Then he shrugged. Actually shrugged. "So you've talked to her," he said. "That's all you have to say?" My voice cracked, but I kept going. "You lied to my face for months. You told me you needed space. You told her I was your crazy ex. And while you were still with me, you proposed to her." He sighed, like I was making his day harder. "Look, it's not what you think." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Really? Because from here, it looks exactly like what I think. Dates, locations, messages, all lined up. I could pin it to a board and run red string between every lie." He stepped aside, letting me in, closing the door like we were just going to have another normal conversation. "I didn't want to lose either of you," he said finally, almost as if he thought it would sound romantic. I stared at him. "Do you hear yourself?" "You don't understand," he said quickly, moving closer. "It's complicated." "There's nothing complicated about it," I shot back. "You were with me while building a life with her. That's not complicated. That's deliberate." He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting everywhere but mine. "The engagement doesn't change how I feel about you. I cut him off. "Stop. Just stop." But he kept going, like the words were a script he'd rehearsed. "I still care about you. I didn't end us because I didn't love you. I had to make a choice, and I chose her. But that doesn't mean you and I didn't have something real." Something real. I wanted to scream that nothing about it was real if it had to be hidden, that every memory was stained by the fact that he'd already promised forever to someone else. But I didn't. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what I should have seen months ago. The way he never looked guilty, only inconvenienced. The way every word was framed to soften his betrayal, to make it feel like my heartbreak was just collateral damage in his complicated love story. "You're not sorry," I said quietly. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I took a step back, my phone still in my hand, the proposal photo still glowing on the screen between us like a lit match. "You built this," I said. "Every word, every excuse, every late-night call you took in another room, it was all part of the foundation. And you didn't trip over one lie. You stacked them, brick by brick, you built a house out of them. And here's the thing about houses made of lies. Eventually, someone opens the front door and realizes the whole place is hollow." I walked out without waiting for him to respond. The night air felt cold against my skin, but for the first time in weeks, my chest felt lighter. Not because I'd won anything, but because I finally understood. You can't reason with someone who sees deception as strategy. Ryan hadn't slipped. He hadn't gotten caught up in the moment or fallen into something by accident. This was architecture, designed, measured, executed, and I was done living in a house he'd built to keep us both trapped inside. I didn't slam doors. I didn't send paragraphs at 2 a.m. that I'd regret in the morning. I didn't even give him the satisfaction of one last fight. When I got home that night, I sat on my bed, phone in my hand, and methodically erased him from my life. blocked on everything: phone, social media, email, deleted every photo, every message thread, even the ones that used to make me smile so much my cheeks hurt. Not because I wanted to pretend it never happened, but because I needed the space, real space, to breathe without him still tugging at my edges. The next morning, I booked a therapy session. I didn't want to just get over him. I wanted to understand why I let myself hang on for so long after the cracks started showing, why I'd been willing to believe words over evidence, why I'd told myself love meant waiting, even when the waiting hurt. Week by week, I started reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd handed over to him without even noticing. I threw myself into work, not as a distraction, but because I'd forgotten how good it felt to succeed at something without wondering if someone else would be proud of me. I said yes to things I'd been putting off: dinner with friends, a weekend trip to the coast, joining the gym I'd been too busy for. It didn't happen overnight, but little by little, my life stopped feeling like the pause between his decisions. And here's the thing: I kept the promise I made to myself years ago after the last heartbreak. I promised I'd never again ignore my gut just to keep the peace. And this time, I didn't. When the truth sat down right in front of me, I didn't push it away. I faced it. I walked out. People like Ryan count on you to doubt yourself. They bank on the fact that love will keep you second-guessing, rewriting your own memories so theirs make more sense. They want you to choose, maybe I'm wrong, over this is wrong. I'm done with that. I know now that if someone asks for space, you don't just give it blindly. You watch where they run to. Because space can mean healing. It can mean reflection. Or it can mean clearing the path so they can propose to someone else without you getting in the way. The worst kind of heartbreak isn't when they leave. It's when they make you believe you still have a chance, while they're already building a life without you. And that's the part that used to hurt the most. Now, it's the part that reminds me exactly why I'll never go back.